In 2020, developer Square Enix released one of the most anticipated video games of all time, Final Fantasy VII Remake. There's a reason why Final Fantasy, especially Final Fantasy VII, is so beloved among the gaming community. In my mind, Final Fantasy VII Remake didn't just update the original's graphics, change up the game's combat, and retell the same story. What Final Fantasy VII Remake showed was just how good and ahead of its time the original game was. Hi everyone, my name is Jay, and this is the Essential Video Game Collection. With Final Fantasy VII Rebirth just on the horizon, I wanted to take a look back at Final Fantasy VII Original. It's one of the most influential games of all time, and fans had been demanding a remake of the game for a while. Even with Final Fantasy VII Remake now out, I think there are still many reasons why fans should go back and play the original if they haven't already. And for those who have played the original, I hope you stick around just to hang out and discuss one of the most important games of all time. This is why Final Fantasy VII Original is still worth playing. For clarity, I'll be referring to the original Final Fantasy VII released in 1997 as Final Fantasy VII Original. The remake from 2020 will just be Final Fantasy VII Remake. In a lot of ways, the PlayStation 1 era was an important era for video games, helping video games come out of the cliché that they're just toys. All of a sudden, games were starting to be compared to movies and were becoming cinematic. Games like Half-Life, Resident Evil 2, Metal Gear Solid, and Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time were all released in 1998, helping to show consumers that games could provide meaningful and impactful experiences. But in 1997, one game did more to push that rhetoric than possibly any other: Final Fantasy VII Original. Developed by Squaresoft in Japan, Final Fantasy VII Original is a story about a group of environmental activists taking on an evil megacorporation called Shinra. Shinra is running the planet dry of its life energy called Mako. In their attempt to stop Shinra from destroying the environment, Cloud and his party uncover an ancient evil that threatens all life on the planet. Along the way, Cloud will have multiple party members joining his team. Memorable characters like Aerith, Tifa, Barrett, Red 13, and Yuffie join the group and set off on a globe-trotting adventure. There are also some wild and wacky characters, like Kate Sith and Vincent. Each one of these characters has a memorable backstory and is filled with personalities that make them pop. Final Fantasy is known for its stories that tackle philosophical themes, and for its characters that carry emotional weight to them. Final Fantasy VII features themes of environmentalism, corporate greed, science without restrictions, indigenous preservation, the transformative power of love, and the cycle of life and death. Keep in mind that this came out in 1997, at a time when games were still primarily marketed towards young boys and were considered children's items, and when so many games were avoiding topics like this. It also has major story revelations and plot details that were way ahead of its time. I won't spoil anything, but even if you are familiar with some of the story details, you probably don't know all of it. Before games like BioShock and Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic, there was Final Fantasy VII. It helped pave the way for big story revelations that were contained in those future games. But if we're talking about the emotional heart of the story, I'd be completely remiss if I didn't talk about the game's music. Composed by Nobuo Uematsu, the music of Final Fantasy VII is the real star of the game. Even though the game's visuals might not be able at times to express the emotions necessary, the music does. It fills the player with a sense of dread. Relief. A feeling of childhood love. and a sense of melancholic joy. Final Fantasy VII Original was also one of the first games to utilize CGI cutscenes in its story and marketing. By today's standards, these cutscenes may seem pretty archaic, but in 1997, these visuals were unprecedented. Just take a look at the opening cinematic behind Final Fantasy VII Original. It opens up with this shot of stars out into space, then onto a close-up of one of the game's characters, Aerith. And when she gets up and starts walking out onto the streets, it pans out to this wide shot of the city of Midgar. At the time, creating a sense of scale and size like this within a video game was surprising and unprecedented. The CGI cutscenes helped to make Final Fantasy VII Original still feel large and epic, despite the rather crude technology that was available. Outside of its story and cinematic elements, Final Fantasy VII Original features turn-based combat. As a kid who was big on shooters and who was obsessed with games like Halo and Gears of War, I thought the old-school style of combat in Final Fantasy games was boring. But now that I'm older, I think there is something charming and unique about turn-based combat. In a lot of ways, this style of gameplay harkens back to the series and genre's roots of tabletop role-playing games. It's like Dungeons & Dragons, except in a video game, where every character takes turns deciding what they want to do during their move. It's simple to understand, but complex enough to be a challenge, and to not be mindless button spamming. Speaking of which, I know some people will look at the game's visuals and be immediately turned off by it. But I want to advocate for a different way of looking at it, which is that it's cartoony and dreamlike. While we often look at newer advancements in visual fidelity with a sense of amazement, we also often look at older, retro forms of technology with wonder and nostalgia. Not just because we think, wow, how did they do this with such primitive technology, but because there's a beautiful simplicity in the art form. Take for example these stills from the game. There's a level of atmosphere, tone, and scale that is breathtaking. Not just that, but there's amazing and beautiful art direction in these worlds, blending these elements of traditional Knights and Dragons fantasy with cyberpunk and steampunk. There's an awesome level of creativity that's gone into the design of the world, from its architecture down to its enemy designs. And the simplicity behind the animations of the characters give it a doll-like feel, like you're a little kid imagining crazy battles with your childhood toys. In many ways, these same elements that made Final Fantasy VII Original so great carried over to Final Fantasy VII Remake. Sure, that could be just Square Enix remaining faithful to the original, but I think it also has to do with how the original game still holds up, even by today's standards. It is timeless. Take a listen to what a few fans of the game have to say about it, and how much of an impact the game had on people's lives.
Final Fantasy VII has had an immeasurable impact on me.
When I played Final Fantasy VII and fell in love with those characters, that cast, and went on the journey with them, I knew that was one of those moments where, like I said previously, I understood the impact that games could have on people because I could feel it happening to me.
I think that my taste in media in general was deeply influenced by me first playing Final Fantasy VII.
Without it, the role-playing genre and the JRPG genre specifically wouldn't be the same. The recent Final Fantasy VII Remake from 2020 is one of my favorite games of all time. It's an amazing and beautiful game that I want as many people to play and experience. But even then, I have to mention Final Fantasy VII Original because of its impact on gaming history. Final Fantasy VII Original is a watermark moment for video games, helping to create cinematic gaming and storytelling that exists today. Whether you've never played it before or will be playing it again for the 100th time, it's hard to overstate Final Fantasy VII Original's importance on video games, which is why it is essential for any video game collection. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel. If you like what you just saw, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me, what is your favorite Final Fantasy game down in the comments below? I'll be happy to check those out. Also, I upload videos every Thursday, so come back again next week for even more on the best that video games have to offer.